Today, the real story of independent financial advice. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Well, this post covering finance and prop news with a distinctively Australian flavour. And today I'm joined by Daniel Brammall, who is just the person to speak to about independent financial advice. Hi, Daniel.
Morning.
Thanks very much for spending some time. Now, let's introduce yourself first. You are the president of the profession of independent financial advisors. So let's start with understanding what that entity is all about.
Well, the profession of independent financial advisors has been around for a little while now. We're small, we punch above our weight as far as the media and the regulator is concerned and industry at large. The organisation exists to professionalise financial planning. What that means is it's designed to be in the public interest. So a lot of professional associations these days are really out to support and promote members' interests, which is not what PIFA is all about. PIFA is designed to protect the consumer and to raise standards below the legal minimum required by law, which is what the regulator is designed to enforce. PIFA exists to ensure that the consumers get much better standards and much better treatment and all the benefits that exist with proper financial planning.
Right. And just to be clear, financial planning that we're talking about here are people not connected to those large organisations that live under their umbrellas. They are people who are effectively and completely independent.
Well, that's where PIFA was born. So the whole concept that drove the profession of independent financial advisors was that sitting on the side of the clients, on that same side of the table, if you like, as the investor, the client, then you really need to be independently minded. You need to be able to have professional opinions that are your own. You've heard the old saying that he who pays the piper calls the tune. That can't be the case when you're talking about genuine independence. So PIFA trademarked a concept called the gold standard of independence, which is very simple at its core. It consists of three elements. The first of those is no commissions paid by third-party product manufacturers. The second of those is no asset fees. And an asset fee is a form of remuneration that the industry has fondly come to call fee for service. But, let's call a spade a spade. It's linked to a transaction. And so a fee for service is a commission by another name. And so those are out. And the third plank to the platform, if you like, is no associations with a product manufacturer, and that completes the circle, if you like, of this independence that is gold standard that clients can come to rely on as being genuinely impartial and unbiased. And it was the only organisation in financial planning, when it trademarked this, that complied with a law that set aside. It's been around now for a long time, this law. It's called Section 923A, fondly it's called the Independence Law, which actually defines under the law what it means to be genuinely independent and call yourself independent.
Right. And so the point there is that when a prospective investor is getting advice from one of your members, they can be sure that the advice is in the interests of that member, and there is no contamination, interests of that investor, and there's no contamination from other remuneration models or other things that could be there below the surface that might not be obvious and might, frankly, skew the advice.
That's right. Time and time again, the regulator, the Australian Securities and Investment Commission, has done these mystery shopping surveys over the last nearly 2 decades now, looking at advice coming from the hands of financial advisors, financial planners from all walks of life. So whether they were employed by the banks, insurance companies, they were free agents. And what they found was that by and large, the presence of conflicts of interest increased the risk of low quality advice. And so PIFA took the standpoint, what purpose do conflicts serve? And frankly, they only exist out of self-interest to promote the interests of the industry. And so if they serve no good purpose for the public, remove them, and all you're left with is quality advice.
Right. So how many advisors then live under this umbrella? I mean, I'm just trying to get a sense of the quantum of advisors in Australia and the quantum that actually provide that independence.
Well, that's a great question, because historically we have been a tiny organisation, so there's only 100 members Australia-wide. There's an advisor directory on the website that shows you how to touch base with those folks. However, on the 1st of July this year, that we're having this conversation in 2021, there was a new rule legislated, born out of the Hayne Royal Commission. If any of your viewers are familiar with the concept of Kenneth Hayne, who was the commissioner who set up the Royal Commission into superannuation and financial advice, a particular rule was recommended, and that was that anybody who does not meet the definition of independence under the law as it stands ought to really be declaring that. There's lots of rules around what you ought to be declaring as a financial planner, what information is useful for a consumer to receive to help them make a call as to whether to hire a financial planner, on what terms to hire them, and what advice to seek. But Hayne felt that there was a very big gap in the information that's required to be provided, and so he made the recommendation: disclose whether you meet independence. That's a very big and important thing that probably should step ahead of a lot of the other disclosures that are required of financial advisors to make. And so as of 1st of July, it's a requirement for your financial advisor to make a declaration in their financial services guide as to whether or not they meet the definition of independence. It's called lack of independence disclosure, if you can believe that.
So do they have to be proactive in terms of communicating to their clients and prospective clients, or is it just snuck away in the product disclosure statement?
Yeah, good question. So the Financial Services Guide has been decided as the home for this particular declaration, and it's required to be prominent and early on in the document. So if it's not on the first page, it should be on page number 2, just inside the cover. You'll find disclosure of independence or lack of independence disclosure in it should be in very prominent wording, and that should be clear.
So folks, if you are looking for a financial planner, have a look for this particular very important phrase and see whether it's there or whether it's not, because it really does make quite a difference in terms of the way that advice is provided. And if you are prospectively somebody looking for a financial planner, if you say that you've got your directory up, and what are the other questions that they should ask of a prospective financial planner in terms of making sure they have a fit-for-person solution to that problem?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of different ways that the public can seek advice, obviously, and there are different types of service now that different financial advisors are tending to specialise in. So I think a couple of the key questions, I mean, first of all, my advice to the public is seek out someone who is independent. Now that it exists, it is growing in popularity. Advisors are starting to see the marketability and the good sense in positioning yourself that way. With the exodus of banks and insurance companies from the wealth management industry, then there's not a lot of good reasons why you ought to continue with conflicts. But because independence exists, first and foremost, seek out someone who's independent. Secondly, scope out what it is that you're really looking to get. So are you interested in transactional style advice, so something which answers a particular question or deals with a particular issue and is quite modular in its approach? Or are you looking for a relationship with someone that's more long-term than that, someone who's looking to partner with you, so to speak, and go on a journey? Because most financial advisors have both capacities. Some prefer one camp or the other, or somewhere in the middle. But scoping out how you want that relationship to be and the sort of topics you want to cover is very, very important to get clear right up front.
Good. And the other question, I guess, comes to mind is the remuneration model. As you say, there are some remuneration models excluded. So is this mostly a fee-for-service type approach that you offer, or what?
Absolutely fee-for-service, and be very mindful of that topic, because there are enormous numbers of financial planners in the country who are promoting a fee-for-service, which is really just a masquerade. So they're not really fee-for-service when they're charging things like asset fees and calling them fees for service. Make sure that your advisor has a transparent and clear form of charging that is divorced, to use a term, from your entering into some sort of transaction. So obviously, one of the problems with an asset fee style arrangement is that you need for the advisor to be managing your assets in order for them to get paid. And that's one of the things that Ken Hayne, the Royal Commissioner, took issue with, because this was a very slippery slope to this fees for no service issue, which is a never-ending, non-stop cup of coffee for the advisor, and no accountability potentially as to whether any service is provided. So some of the more common forms of remuneration that you can look at when contemplating hiring an advisor is obviously hourly rate, fixed fee, monthly retainer. Sometimes there's a set menu of services that are quite clear and distinct as to what it is that you're getting, and each of them has their own distinct price. There's a number of other methods that are clear, but as long as it makes sense to you and it doesn't rope you into a transaction, so that you can be sure that it's clear what it is that you're paying for and what you can expect by way of service and advice.
Right, and it sounds more like the model of a solicitor or another other professional service provider, rather than, frankly, a product salesperson.
Well, that's right, and let's face it, this is where the industry has come from. That's why it's been so difficult for the industry to shrug off the shackles of product salesmen, is because that's where they came from. And for quite a while, particularly under the bank's influence, pre-Ken Hayne, pre the Royal Commission, what we saw was that the industry wanted to be treated like a professional, like an advisor, but behave like a salesperson. And that could never last forever. And so what we're left with now is something that's quite clear, clearly professional, properly articulated, transparent, and collaborative with the client, rather than adversarial, trying to sort of sneak around and take some cash out of the client's pocket.
That's right. Open your wallet and help yourself, sort of thing.
Yeah, that's right.
And in terms of training, is there any difference in terms of the level of training or the type of training that these professional planners have relative to those within the broader industry and under those large organisations?
At the moment, there is a group called FASIA, so the Financial Advisors Standards and Education Authority, that was set up a couple of years ago to standardise, if you like, well, firstly to raise the bar and to set a standard as a minimum legal requirement for all financial advisors. And to achieve that outcome, FASIA looked at other professions, e.g. accounting, e.g. law, and identified that, look, there are a couple of key things that we think a budding profession is going to have to get. One of them is going to have to be a degree that's relevant. So it can't be a degree in fine arts and chemistry. It needs to be a degree around economics and finance and money. It needs to be a professional year completed, so some professional experience with a firm, and a number of other requirements in terms of ethical courses that need to be completed as part of that. So at the moment, what we're seeing is an incorporation of a new standard of education that's quite frankly what the public ought to have expected from day one. It's been quite a long time in coming. There were complaints that were not that long ago that if you could fog a mirror as a financial planner, you could drive taxi one day and then sign on as a financial planner. Those days are well and truly gone.
It's good to hear, and I think are totally appropriate. And what about financial planning in the context of superannuation versus outside superannuation? Is it as relevant in both spheres?
Oh, very much. So if you're dealing with an advisor and the topic is superannuation, then you would expect that advisor to be able to draw from any type of superannuation that's available in the country and be able to advise you on whether it's appropriate or not. So we're talking about industry superannuation funds, retail, wholesale, self-managed super funds. The whole gamut is what you ought to be dealing with. If you imagine superannuation a bit like the product itself, then whether the flavour, frankly, is industry or self-managed or something through a master trust or a large-scale provider through a bank or insurance company, it's a secondary consideration. The rules first need to be, how do I get money into super? What do I do with it once it's in there? And then at the other end of the spectrum, how do I get it out and start to drive a lifestyle in retirement? once you've got that strategy set, then really selecting the right product becomes a more pedestrian exercise.
Right, but is it different then in terms of outside superannuation? I guess there are perhaps more options and choices, but also more traps.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, the internet, the wonderful thing that it is, it's increased the availability of enormous, almost bottomless pit of information, and money is no stranger to the internet. I mean, you can Google anything in the financial planning world and get superannuation, ordinary money investing, buy properties over here, insurance over here, get into some sort of a share trading scheme over here. So there's plenty of information. Really what's lacking is someone's ability to make sense of it for you and bring it back to your own personal context, where that fits in terms of what you want to accomplish, your own set of risks, your own set of comforts, and what feels right and what you can tolerate, your sleep requirement factor, and your need to make ends meet and get a result.
And one of the things I've discovered as I've looked more deeply at the industry is that the top level performance quoted by, for example, superannuation funds and other investment funds, right, don't necessarily reflect the true returns for individuals who might be investors in those funds, right? There are other fees floating around which actually aren't necessarily always disclosed. So trying to actually really unpick the true returns over time is actually quite complicated. And my suspicion is that financial planners can also provide significant insight there too. Yeah,
quite true. There's a big difference. There's been studies done about this, plenty of studies in the States, in fact, about the returns experience of let's say a fund, an investment vehicle of some sort that's collective that people invest into, and the pool gets invested by a manager of sorts. What that fund itself experiences in terms of a return, and investors who invested in that particular fund, their experience of the return, obviously they're going to have the fees. But in addition to that, what seems to be the trend is that investors get in and get out. If they're not taking advice, then there's no plan usually, or it's a haphazard plan, or no accountability and discipline around it. And so their experience of the investment returns might be very, very different, something far less than what the fund actually posts, simply because of the fact that they were in at the wrong time, got out at the wrong time. They were tossing dice and reading tea leaves and consulting the auguries and trying to work out when's the best time to be in there, rather than following a concerted plan and then getting the best out of the fund that they were entitled to.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that in some of the people I speak with, where they took funds out when the market had dropped considerably. The start of COVID, markets collapsed, people panicked, they pulled money out, and unfortunately they took it out at the wrong point because they then missed the upside after that. Yeah. And that's the object lesson of about it's important to have a perspective that isn't just day to day, but actually strategically over time. And again, planners have more of a sense of that than I think many individual investors would.
Yes, yeah, quite right. And there's a whole field of financial science, it's called now, behavioural science, as far as it relates to economics, that has been around for about 20 years now, and is really hitting its strides. It's not just about investing, and it's not about the mechanics of taxation and fees and investment risk and return and all those things. It's also about managing the space between your ears. And the one best equipped to do that is having a partnership with someone who is genuinely impartial and can sort of steer you through those pitfalls in that minefield, and not make the classic mistakes that are just pointless mistakes to make and cost you dearly.
And unfortunately, when you make the mistakes, it can take a long time to repair the damage if you have enough longevity before you need to access those funds later.
Exactly right. Yeah, that's right.
And unfortunately, as people get towards retirement, sometimes they extend their desire for significantly higher returns and take on more risk, and then don't necessarily always understand the risks that they're getting into. That's just the nature of the beast.
There's an analogy we tend to use quite a bit for that, and that is how late for the appointment are you running? So we often see someone come along to a financial planner and consult them, and they've either left it too late, or they were embarking on an investment strategy that contains far more risk that either they need to take or that they were aware of, simply because they feel the pressure of time. They're running late for their appointment, and even though the right speed limit posted in this particular investment street is 60, they want to do 110 because they need to get there fast. And so the best thing that you can do is start early, The next best thing you can do is get very, very clear by working with a consultant on what it is that I need, genuinely speaking, and what sort of risks do I need to take, and start to rethink the plan. Are there ways that we can get to our goal without taking more investment risk than we need to? Are there downsizing strategies we can take into account? Can we rent out a room? Airbnb is now a thing, pre-COVID, God forbid. There's all sorts of different ideas that you can start to contemplate without, putting it all on black or putting it all on a Nelly and hoping things work well.
And I was going to ask the question, how soon in terms of years, should you start? People in their 20s think, retirement, it's way, way, way there. But my suspicion is that quite often people, as they, even at that stage in their life, they should be thinking about these sorts of things.
Yeah, and we are seeing a proliferation of items out there in the consumer channels to assist with that. Scott Pape has become quite prolific with his Barefoot Investor series. Before him, Paul Clitheroe was very big with his Money series on telly. And then there's people who are outside the financial planning sphere, usually overseas spruikers. The Rich Dad Poor Dad series, and whether you agree with his concepts or not, he does sort of bring that awareness to the table and invites the average consumer to think about what should I be doing and why. I'd encourage people to do it as soon as possible. For those grey-haired old fools like myself, and you've got young kids, have a conversation with them about 1+1, about the money tree. Download online the book called The Richest Man in Babylon. It's not complicated. It doesn't cost a cent. Some of the most priceless and timeless lessons on money management are there for all ages, but start with the kids. And then as the kids get to their own, maturity and they starting to earn a dollar, have a look online, find out some more information. There's lots of Robo systems now coming to the fore, so systems online that start to walk people through the concept of planning. There's a great system online called Map My Plan, and that's designed, they had an ambition of making sure that every Australian has their own financial plan. Now, that doesn't require that you go and consult a financial planner or have a relationship or enter into a transaction. It's really thinking through what it is that you want. It's not locked in concrete. You can always change your own plans. Man plans, God laughs, as they say, but start with a plan. Don't wander in circles for 20 years and then say, what happened to my life? Get started soon.
And I was going to ask about the Robo advice, because of course it is growing, and also about the sort of minimum portfolio size that it makes sense to get planning advice, because presumably if you've got a really small portfolio, then maybe the cost of the advice wouldn't necessarily be warranted, or am I assigning the relative cost versus the relative value?
Well, you can apply this to any endeavour. Some people think that they can do their own electrician's work, they can do their own plumbing, they can do their own brain surgery. Have a crack and see how you go. But there are basic administrative things that anybody can do, and you don't need to fork out big amounts of money to do. Any advisor would be counselling you not to waste money. And paying someone big time to get a very straightforward answer online is an example of wasting money. But there are some investments that you can make in your own tuition with the Robo thing, and in relationships, maybe transactional at first, and as the stakes start to go up. I work with coaches myself, where I'll pay somebody to give me an objective view on my own subjectivity, and we're seeing that more and more commonly, not just in business, but consumers. There's going and talking to a counsellor in any area, whether it be money, mental health, whether it's going to consult your PT. We all go down to the gym, say, for example, and we know what we need to do. So PTs shouldn't exist, but there is a very valid reason for having a PT if you want to actually make some progress in a measured and methodical way.
Yes, it's sometimes useful to have that objective person other than yourself to be both an encouragement but also a little bit of a critique sometimes, or a critic sometimes, to make sure
have
that
nowhere to hide. We always put up that BS excuse. No, I've just had a slice of pizza. I couldn't possibly.
Exactly.
Get out there. Go on. Have a go.
Last question. How do you think this industry is going to evolve from this point? You know, we've had the Royal Commission. Clearly, there have been significant changes. The focus is very much now on the value of advice. On the other hand, fees are being squeezed or left, right and centre. And, you know, buckets of money are being shifted one to the other to try and get around the current legislation. So how is this industry going to evolve? And how do you see, you know, at least in vision terms, the future of independent financial advice and independent financial planning in Australia?
Well, I'm very optimistic. I think what has happened has given the industry a hell of a shake-up, and certainly there are those factions in the industry that are upset about it. There are a lot of dinosaurs who were extinct and didn't realise it, who are leaving the industry in droves, and so be it. I'm optimistic that this is going to evolve into a profession. It's not quite there yet. There's sections in the industry calling themselves a profession, and you know, a profession is a voluntary thing. And it's not about minimum standards. The profession is setting the bar higher than that and saying, not asking the question, what can we do as the minimum required by law? That's not what you'd expect of a professional on whom you'd want to rely. And I think the industry is starting to shrug off the shackles of its past and move to a point where it really achieves and lives what it has always wanted to. A lot of financial advisors, day in, day out, these big picture issues that Kenneth Hayne sort of uncovered, you know, the dirty underbelly, if you like, of the financial services industries. A lot of financial planners, they just go to work, they look after their clients, they do a superb job. Conflicts, they ignore them, they just do their thing, and the clients benefit as a result. Now, that sort of unassuming approach to financial advice is where we need to get back to. There is no point in vilifying an entire industry for the sins of, you know, a boardroom bank. What we're seeing evolve more and more is that financial advisors, I mean, we're getting a lot more inquiries from financial advisors who are starting to see fewer and fewer reasons to clutch onto conflicts, and they're getting back to their core business of looking after their clients and relating to them on the same side of the table. I'm really optimistic. I think that the future prosperity of the average Australian consumer is looking good.
Good to hear. And Daniel, I really appreciate your time today. I found that a really fascinating discussion. And, you know, I think a lot of people on the DFA channel will find your advice really helpful. We'll put the links and things below if people want to go and look at the listing that's there. And I think, you know, some of the basic questions about, you know, where do you get advice? How do you get advice? How do you pay for that advice? And how independent is it? Are brilliant questions. And I'd encourage everybody to, you know, take note, but also don't to be backward in coming forward in getting advice, because the sooner you get advice, the more likely is you can lay the plans for the future. And folks, remember, there's a wonderful thing called compounding, which is basically interest on interest on interest. And the earlier you start, the more you benefit from that. And for me personally, I think the compounding thing is the thing that probably is the driving reason as to why you do this earlier rather than later at the end of the day.
Bingo.
Thank you very much indeed. We'll talk again down the track.
Thanks, Martin.